One of the most noted dark underbellies of the current European migrant crisis is the charge that the individuals allowed to indiscriminately cross the border come from a culture of misogyny where rape and violence against women is normalized. There have been widespread reports of mass sexual assault in refugee camps and claims of officials being instructed not to report sexual violence. In Rotterdam between 1997 and 2013, the cases of an estimated 1,400 children who suffered abduction, rape, torture, or sex trafficking were covered up in the interest of not wanting to contribute to bad press from Muslims. On New Year's Eve 2015 in Germany, 1,200 women were sexually assaulted by migrants, mainly in Cologne, in what later became known as the infamous Cologne sex attacks. In Norway, these events and others have even led to rape classes for migrants where they are taught how to treat women and avoid raping them. Many could also point to Sweden, which has recently acquired the dubious title of rape capital of the world, and where rising rates of sexual assault are frequently argued to be due to an increasing influx of Syrian migrants. The connection is possible and is probably at least in some small part accurate, but I remain personally unconvinced of this, due to the fact that rates of sexual assault have long been rising sharply in the country, and may in fact owe more to the nation's secondary distinction as one of the feminist capitals of the world, where the definition of what is considered rape may be becoming looser and looser over time due to a strong feminist lobby, and in fact in 2005 the rape laws were expanded. However, I would note that at least according to Wikipedia, quote, individuals with an immigrant background made up 53% of all rape convictions between 1985 and 1989. Unfortunately, the original document is in Swedish, which I am unable to translate. What one can be sure of is that accurately or inaccurately, and I would probably think accurately, the Arab refugees in Europe have become synonymous with the word rape, so much so that many have taken to calling them rape-fugees. Ultimately, for the purposes of this discussion, the accuracy of the charge may be of less importance than the fact that the charge has been made, the charge has stuck, and the charge has found its way into the collective consciousness of the European and American citizenry. Now the issue becomes, if these individuals represent such a backward, misogynistic, and violently sexual culture, how can it be that their strongest lobby in the West comes from women and feminists? Many men seem to be toiling in a sort of frustrated confusion, pulling hairs out of their heads and trying to make sense of something which seems to fly contradictorily in the face of everything that they have grown up to believe about women and conventional morality. However, when certain dogmatic beliefs and ideas about gender relations are disregarded and the rose-tinted spectacles are lifted from the eyes laid upon third-wave feminism, the picture becomes agonizingly clear. It should be painfully obvious to all but the most sheepishly indoctrinated that third-wave feminism is little more than a theoretical framework of ideas through which women express dissatisfaction with Western society, masquerading, as all political movements do, as a righteous cause. In truth, it is a deep-seated primal frustration with the inadequacies of modern urban Western life that ultimately motivates the lobby. Genuine concern for women's rights or welfare is always secondary or tertiary to the deep-seated emotional rage that dwells in the souls of angry feminists and progressives. When we accept this and disregard the idea that feminism is primarily concerned with the welfare of women, we can begin to understand some of the confusing paradoxes that we see with current left-wing platforms. Western life is, in many ways, a very difficult life for a woman. Here in the USA, we are very fond of saying freedom isn't free, but too often we use the expression with the assumption that all or most people are ultimately willing to pay its price. Very few would stop and consider that maybe freedom does not appeal to everyone. Certainly with freedom comes personal accountability, and it should at least be clear that this is one concept that does not quite mesh well with female nature.
How do you write women so well?
I think of a man, and I take away reason and accountability.
It can be a very frightening thing for some people to come to terms with the fact that they, and only they, are ultimately responsible for their own actions and outcomes. It's psychologically and intellectually easier to place your faith in something greater than yourself, an unseen hand which will guide the way safely through the untamed wilderness of life. Likewise, the expectation of earning that has been placed upon women in modern society is not always appealing. Work is difficult, work is time-consuming, and work for many women in today's economy is little more than slavery. While it may be uncommon to hear women openly profess a willingness to return to a culture where they're allowed to stay at home and reap the benefits of male labor, it is more common to hear them complain that the dual expectations of homemaker and financial earner are simply too much for them to handle. Ultimately, the price of Western freedom and Western autonomy is steep. While men have no real choice, it's easy for them to forget that women often do. Arab culture is wholly antithetical to Western culture, regardless of whether or not you believe the charges of misogyny in the Middle East have been overplayed by the right-wing political lobby, though I would suggest that for the most part they have not. The perception is that women in the Middle East are owned and treated as second-class citizens and have very little responsibility. On some level, I would suggest that Islam and Middle Eastern values represent a romanticized means of escape from the personal accountability and cold, rugged independence that many 21st century females are born into. And before any claim is made that my assertion is no more than baseless speculation, let me at least point to the noted decline in women's happiness over recent decades. As women have achieved more rights and parity with their male peers, their self-reported feelings of happiness and fulfillment have not gone up as one would expect, but instead, quite to the contrary, they have gone down. The following slides are taken from a 2009 report entitled The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness by Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers. The Islamic migrants in many ways represent to the Western female a conduit to which she may return to a more traditional way of life, a life that existed in the Western world before feminism. It represents the life that they could have had, that perhaps still lurks in fond remembrance somewhere in their genetic code, a life they could live if they were not indoctrinated to believe that the path to happiness and fulfillment was to become a strong, independent career woman. I believe that somewhere deep within the souls of these women, there is a primal voice crying out that Western men are weak, that they cannot take care of a woman, that they cannot keep a woman, and that somewhere in the world there must be better prospects for mating. Now surely you may be asking yourself, the threat of rape and sexual assault alone would be enough to deter these young women from support of such a backwards culture, would it not? And empirical evidence provides sort of a different answer and paints for many what is a surprising picture. The following text is taken from a 2010 Psychology Today article. Quote, from 1973 to 2008, 9 surveys of women's rape fantasies have been published. They show that about 4 in 10 women admit having them, 31 to 57%, with a median frequency of about once a month. Actual prevalence of rape fantasies is probably higher, because women may not feel comfortable admitting them. End quote. Also, though anecdotal, there have been documented cases of women surviving sex attacks at the hands of migrants, only to not report them, supposedly for fear of contributing to anti-migrant sentiment.
Warum haben Sie da gelogen? Ich habe gelogen, weil ich Angst hatte, dass es von rechts missbraucht wird, um die Hetze gegen Flüchtlinge weiter anzuheizen, die gerade nach den Vorfällen in Köln an der Silvesternacht dramatisch angestiegen ist. Und ich wollte einfach nicht, dass meine Geschichte ihnen irgendwie nochmal Auftrieb liefert und vor allem, wenn sie herausfinden, dass ich das bin, dass es dann heißt, so ja, hier, schaut mal her, ihr Linken, jetzt werdet ihr auch schon von Migranten und Flüchtlingen vergewaltigen, so jetzt müsstet das doch auch.
Of course, if masses of young, healthy, fit, and horny exotic women were crossing borders and making their way into European cities with the intent of fornicating with the male natives, most men probably would not care. In fact, the demographic support for those migrants might be the perfect inverse of what we find in our situation. Arab migrants ultimately represent strong, healthy, and genetically diverse mating prospects, who in many cases have proven their worth in surviving long, harsh journeys from a homeland that is ultimately far more inhospitable and dangerous than that of the comparatively sheltered and untested typical European or American male, the appeal is one of both primal lust and of a romanticized vision of a culture that represents a release from the day-to-day responsibilities of Western society. Thank you, and all relevant citations are listed below.